Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
Christmas Eve had always carried a strange kind of magic for our family, the kind of ritual that smelled like cinnamon candles and tasted like slightly burnt ham, the kind of gathering that always, without fail, managed to turn bittersweet before the night was over. I pulled up to my parents' house just as the sun was sinking low, its last lazy rays stretching over the icicle-rimmed roof, and for a moment, standing there with my arms full of neatly wrapped presents, I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, this year would be different. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. The living room was already bursting with bodies and noise, nieces tearing through the house in their new sparkly dresses, my dad pretending to be patient as Mom yelled at him for sampling the cookies before dinner. My brother, Danny, leaned against the doorway like he owned the damn place, beer in hand, that same cocky smirk playing on his face that had worn since he was 12 years old and decided the world owed him something just for breathing. I dumped my gifts under the tree and made my way into the chaos, handing out hugs like they were rationed, careful not to smudge my lipstick on Aunt Carol's sequin sweater. Every year we did this dance, the awkward small talk, the fake laughs, the undercurrent of old fights no one wanted to mention, but everyone still felt buzzing just under the surface. I could practically taste the tension in the air, as familiar as the eggnog in my cup. Finally, the moment everyone had been waiting for, the gift exchange. Little ones went first, naturally, squealing with excitement as they ripped into brightly colored packages. Parents followed, passing around heavy gift bags and meticulously wrapped boxes, the paper shimmering under the glow of the tree lights. Danny was playing Santa this year, handing out gifts with exaggerated flair, announcing each name like he was hosting a goddamn game show. "One for Sarah," he bellowed, tossing a box to my sister. "One for Mom. One for Dad." Cheers and laughter filled the room as each person unwrapped something thoughtful, scarves, gadgets, hand-knit sweaters. The pile under the tree got smaller and smaller, the buzz in the room thickening like bad gravy, until finally, there were no more packages left. Not a single one for me. I sat there, frozen, the fake smile pasted on my face starting to ache as the realization sank in. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe he had missed one. I gave Danny a small wave, keeping my voice light so no one else would pick up on the acid rising in my throat. "Hey, Danny," I said, "did you forget someone?" He really looked at me with that same lazy, mean glint in his eyes he used to flash at me when he stole the last cookie off my plate just to watch me cry. He shrugged, as casual as if he were discussing the weather. "You make more money than all of us combined, sis," he said loud enough for half the room to hear. "You don't need anything." The words hung in the air, heavy and wet, like a slap I didn't see coming. A few awkward chuckles scattered around the room. My parents suddenly found the carpet extremely interesting. My cousins pretended to fuss with their kids. Nobody said a damn thing. Nobody looked at me. Now, I could have exploded. I could have called him out right there, thrown my drink in his smug face, made a scene that people would still be whispering about at next year's Thanksgiving. God knows every muscle in my body was itching to do exactly that. But instead, I did something much smarter. Much colder. I smiled. I bit down so hard on the inside of my cheek I tasted blood, but I smiled. Because right then, right in that humiliating moment, I decided Danny had just written himself a check his ass wasn't going to be able to cash. He thought he had humiliated me. He thought he had scored some kind of petty little victory. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the game had only just started, and I had every intention of playing to win. I leaned back in my chair, swirling my drink, pretending not to notice the guilty glances being thrown my way. I laughed along when someone made a joke, clapped when little Becky showed off her new dollhouse. Played the part so well that even I almost believed it. But under all that, something sharp and electric was humming through my veins, something that tasted a hell of a lot sweeter than eggnog ever could. Revenge. Sweet, patient, perfect revenge. 2 days later, when Danny would call me, his voice frantic and full of fake sweetness, asking for a tiny favor, he would find out just how expensive it was to make an enemy out of me. He would learn that sometimes, the best gifts are the ones you never see coming. I smiled and said nothing, but I was already planning something he wouldn't forget. Growing up with Danny meant growing up in a constant low-grade war zone, where battles were fought over everything from who got the bigger slice of birthday cake to who got to sit in the front seat on the way to church, and for some reason I never quite understood back then, he always seemed to think he was the one getting shortchanged. I was the good kid, the golden child, the one who brought home straight as remembered to feed the dog, and somehow always ended up with the teacher's smile or the neighbor's praise, without even trying. Meanwhile, Danny stumbled through everything like a wrecking ball in a china shop, clumsy and loud, always 2 steps behind, but with enough charm to talk himself out of whatever mess he had landed in. I used to think it was funny, the way he could spin a story so fast it left adults dizzy and convinced he was just misunderstood, but somewhere along the way, it stopped being funny. Somewhere between the 3rd time he borrowed the cash from my piggy bank and the 5th time he blamed me for something he did, it started to feel like something deeper, something meaner. I never really called him out for it, not the way I should have, because back then I still believed that if you just kept being the good one, the fair one, eventually people would see the truth without you having to shove it in their faces. I can still remember one Christmas morning when I was about 8 years old, and Danny, being the mastermind that he thought he was, managed to swap the tags on our gifts, so he ended up opening the bike that my parents had saved up for months to buy me. I had been dreaming about that bike for a year. Red paint, so shiny you could see your reflection in it. White handlebars with little silver streamers. And there he was, riding circles around the living room while I sat frozen on the couch, clutching a pair of wool socks and pretending it didn't matter. My parents figured out the switch eventually, but by then, Danny had already left a big muddy tire track right across the living room carpet and right across my heart. It was always like that with Danny. Small thefts, little betrayals, the kind of things you could almost convince yourself to forget if you squinted hard enough. When we were teenagers, he flunked out of high school 3 times before he turned 18, though thinking about it now, that math probably doesn't even add up right. But in the moment, it felt like he was failing on purpose, as if he wanted the whole world to see how hard it was for him, how easy it was for me, and feel sorry for him. Meanwhile, every report card I brought home, every scholarship letter, just seemed to widen the canyon between us until there was nothing left to shout across but old anger and fresh resentment. The older we got, the more his resentment hardened into something uglier. At family dinners, he would find ways to slip in little jabs about my job, my house, my car. Must be nice, he'd say, in that sing-song voice that made it sound like a joke, but wasn't really. Some of us have to work for a living, you know. Never mind that I had busted my ass for every dime I made, working 2 jobs through college while he dropped out of one trade school after another, always chasing some half-baked dream that collapsed like a bad souffle the second real effort was required. But even after all that, even after years of biting my tongue until it bled, I never once humiliated him in front of the family. Not once. That was the line I wouldn't cross. I knew what it was like to feel small. I knew what it was like to have people whisper about you behind your back. And no matter how much he deserved it, no matter how tempting it was to strike back, I never did. I guess part of me kept hoping he would outgrow it, that the kid who used to steal my lunch money would eventually become a man I could be proud to call my brother. That hope died a quiet death on Christmas Eve, when he stood there smirking in front of the whole damn family and decided that hurting me was the best present he could give himself. It was not just a petty move. It was a declaration. A line drawn in the sand that he dared me to cross. And this time, for once in my life, I was going to cross it. Because as much as I tried to be the bigger person, as much as I wanted to pretend it didn't get to me, it did. It got to me deep. It dug into places I thought had healed years ago, ripping them open fresh and raw. And just like when we were kids, he thought he could take from me without ever paying the price. 2 days after the Christmas that landed like a punch to the gut, I was back at my house, wrapped up in a blanket, watching some half-hearted Christmas movie where everyone smiled too much and nobody stabbed you in the heart over mashed potatoes. When my phone lit up with Danny's name, I almost let it ring out of pure spite, my thumb hovering over the red decline button longer than I probably should have, but something, maybe curiosity, maybe something darker, made me answer. His voice hit me like a cold bucket of water, a syrupy mix of fake cheer and underlying panic that he didn't even bother to hide. "Hey, sis," he said, dragging out the words like he thought maybe he'd catch me in a better mood if he sounded extra chipper. "Hope you're having a great holiday. Listen, I was wondering if you had a second to talk about something important." There was a beat of silence, and I could almost hear him squirming on the other end of the line, probably pacing his cluttered living room, probably clutching a beer bottle he told himself he didn't need but kept grabbing anyway. I leaned back against the couch, one foot tucked under the other, and said in the sweetest voice I could muster, "Sure, Danny. What's up?" And that was when he dropped it, like a bomb he didn't even know how to defuse. "So here's the thing," he said, clearing his throat. "I'm in a little bit of a tight spot right now with the shop. You know, the economy, inflation, bad luck, whatever. It's just been a rough year, and, well, I hate to ask, but I need a small loan to get through the winter." Small loan. That was the phrase he used, like he was asking to borrow $20 to fill up his gas tank, not the $50,000 he casually mentioned in the next breath. 50,000. Not 500, not 5,000. 50 grand, like it was pocket change he could just toss around once things picked up again, which, judging by his track record, would happen right around the time Pig sprouted wings and took flight over Kansas. I let his words hang in the air for a moment, not saying anything, just letting him stew in the silence because I knew Danny and Danny hated silence. He rushed to fill it, his words tumbling over themselves in that desperate way he got when he realized the room was turning against him. "I mean, obviously, I'd pay you back," he said, too quickly. "Interest, too. We could work something out, like an official loan contract if you want to be all formal about it. I really need someone to believe in me right now." Believe in him. That was rich, coming from the guy who couldn't even believe in setting an alarm clock to show up to work on time. I could almost see his face in my mind, that crooked smile, the hopeful eyes, the way he probably thought that because we shared blood, I'd fall right back into line like I always did when we were kids and he needed bailing out. Part of me wanted to slam the door right there, cut him off mid-sentence, and tell him to go find someone else to save him from his own stupidity. But another part, the colder, smarter part of me, knew there was a better way. A way to finally teach him that burning bridges had consequences. So I sighed, making it sound heavier than it needed to be, and said, "Danny, that's a lot of money. I'm gonna need some time to think about it." He pounced on that like a starving dog on a scrap of meat, gushing about how grateful he was, how he knew I was always the smart one, how he knew he could count on me. I listened to him pour it on thicker than molasses in January, murmuring little noncommittal noises into the phone, while my mind was already racing ahead, laying out every move on the chessboard I was about to dominate. Because I wasn't just going to say no. No would have been too easy, too clean. No wouldn't leave a mark. I was going to give him exactly what he asked for, just not in the way he thought. Hanging up, I stared at the ceiling for a long minute, feeling that old war inside me start to rumble again. The part that still believed family was supposed to mean something fighting against the part that knew, deep down, some debts couldn't be repaid with blood alone. I thought about all the Christmases, all the birthdays, all the little moments where Danny had made it clear that my success was a weapon he resented, not a gift he celebrated. And it hit me then, harder than anything he had ever said or done. Danny didn't want my help. He wanted my failure. He wanted me to need him the way he had always needed me, to stumble, to fall, so he could stand over me for once and feel like the winner. I closed my eyes and smiled, a slow, grim little smile that felt like the first honest thing I had done all week. I told him I'd help, but not in the way he thought. The morning after Danny's pathetic little phone call, I sat at my kitchen counter sipping coffee that had long since gone cold, my mind already racing ahead while the rest of the world was barely dragging itself out of bed. I could have just said no, could have let him flounder and drown in the pit he had dug with his own 2 hands, but after years of swallowing my anger and smiling through the slights, I finally wanted something more satisfying than silence. I wanted him to know what it felt like to be powerless, to have the rug yanked out from under him by someone he thought he had under control. So instead of transferring a single cent, I made a different call, one that would change the game completely, a move not out of anger, but out of something sharper, something colder. Something I didn't even recognize in myself until I heard my own voice asking my lawyer if he could dig up some information for me. Mr. Klein was efficient, a no-nonsense man who understood how the world really worked, and it only took him about a day to unearth the full, rotting truth behind Danny's so-called tight spot. The business Danny was trying to save, the one he had built up to the family as his great comeback story, wasn't just struggling, it was collapsing faster than a termite-eaten barn in a hurricane. He had taken out loans from 3 different banks, owed back rent on his shop space, had unpaid invoices stacking up like a bad game of Jenga, and was facing at least 2 separate lawsuits from former employees who claimed he had stiffed them on wages. His debts were so tangled it would have taken a team of miracle workers just to sort through the paperwork, and even then, the prognosis would have been the same, terminal. But here was the real kicker, the detail that made me smile so hard I almost dropped the phone. The majority of Danny's debts were secured against his business assets, meaning whoever held those debts basically owned him. They owned the tools, the equipment, the lease, and in a nasty twist of irony, even the rights to his company name if they decided to push him into bankruptcy. It was almost too easy, so easy I wondered for half a second if maybe I should feel guilty, but then I remembered the smug look on his face that night by the Christmas tree and decided, no, this was exactly what was deserved. I set the wheels in motion quickly, moving through a maze of shell companies and quiet buyouts so that by the end of the week, without Danny even realizing it, I held the majority stake in everything he thought he still controlled. I had bought his debts, bought his business, bought the very ground he stumbled around on like a blind man in a dark room. When the paperwork was finalized, when everything was neatly tied up in legal bows and there was no undoing it, I invited the family out for brunch under the flimsy pretense of wanting to catch up before the new year. Mom and Dad were delighted, my cousins eagerly accepted, and Danny, poor, clueless Danny, showed up late, looking like he had barely slept. Like maybe the cracks in his world were starting to show, but he still thought he could patch them with another lie or another borrowed favor. We sat around a too bright, too cheery restaurant table, the clatter of silverware and laughter filling the air, while I played my part perfectly, asking Danny about his business, smiling sweetly when he puffed up and assured everyone he was turning things around. My parents beamed at him like he was a war hero come home, completely oblivious to the fact that he was standing on a trapdoor I had built under his feet. I waited until the coffee was served, until the plates were cleared, until Danny leaned back with that satisfied smirk, thinking he had survived yet another round of family scrutiny unscathed. That was when I leaned in, resting my chin on my hand, and casually dropped the bomb that I was the new silent partner he would be working with moving forward. For a moment, he didn't get it. For a moment, he just stared at me like I had started speaking a language he didn't know. And then, slowly, beautifully, I watched the realization seep into his face, the widening of the eyes, the stiffening of the jaw, the way his hand gripped the tablecloth like he needed to hold onto something solid or risk falling through the floor. I told him, still smiling like butter wouldn't melt in my mouth, that I had recently made some strategic investments in his company, and that as majority creditor, I now had the final say over major business decisions. He could keep running things day to day, of course, but any big moves, any expansions, any restructuring would need my approval. The table went dead silent, forks midair. eyes darting between us like they had stumbled into a live grenade about to go off. Danny opened his mouth once, twice, but no words came out, and for the first time in my life, I saw my brother completely, utterly speechless. I leaned back, letting the sweet taste of victory settle on my tongue, savoring it like the finest wine. He had wanted me to feel small at Christmas. He had wanted to humiliate me, to remind me that no matter how much money or success I had, I was still nothing to him. But now, sitting there in that too-bright diner, surrounded by cheap holiday decorations and the stunned faces of our family, he finally understood the real lesson I had been waiting years to teach him. The look on his face when he realized the truth? God, it was better than any Christmas gift. For the first few days after the brunch, the house stayed quiet, too quiet really, like the silence after a heavy snowfall when the whole world feels padded and slow and dangerous underneath the beauty. I didn't hear from Danny, and honestly, I didn't expect to. Part of me figured he was somewhere nursing his wounded pride with a bottle and a bad attitude, punching walls or cursing my name to anyone who would listen. Another part, the part one didn't like to look at too closely, hoped maybe he would call, maybe we could talk like real adults for once, maybe we could dig our way out of the wreckage we had both helped build. But I knew better than to hang my hopes on a man like my brother. Weeks passed, the Christmas decorations came down, the snow started melting into dirty slush along the gutters, and life moved forward with the stubborn inevitability that always feels like a betrayal when you're waiting for something that never comes. Work got busy, taxes loomed, and if it weren't for the occasional awkward call from my mother asking if I had heard from Danny, I might have convinced myself that the whole thing had been a bad dream. It was late on a Thursday night, well past the time I normally locked the doors and shut off the lights, when I heard it, the heavy, clumsy banging on the front door, loud enough to make my heart jolt into my throat. I froze, mug of tea halfway to my mouth, every horror movie I had ever watched flashing through my mind, before I set it down and crept toward the door. Through the peephole, I saw him, Danny, swaying slightly head down, one fist still thumping against the wood in a slow, sloppy rhythm that set my teeth on edge. Against my better judgment, against the little voice in my head screaming to just pretend I wasn't home, I opened the door. He looked awful, worse than I had ever seen him, eyes bloodshot, face red from cold and probably from drinking too much cheap whiskey. His coat hung off him like a wet rag, and he reeked of alcohol and anger, a combination so familiar it made something deep inside me flinch before I forced myself to stand up straight. "You think you're so smart," he slurred, pointing a shaky finger at me like he was accusing me of something far worse than betrayal. "You think you're better than all of us, don't you?" I didn't answer right away. I stepped aside and let him stumble inside, if only to avoid giving the neighbors something else to gossip about. He dropped heavily onto the couch, head in his hands, breathing so loudly it filled the room. "You screwed me," he said after a while, his voice hoarse and low. "You didn't have to do it like that. You didn't have to make me small." I leaned against the wall, arms crossed tight across my chest, and for a second, I didn't see the angry drunk slumped in front of me. I saw the little boy who used to beg me to cover for him when he snuck out late at night, the teenager who punched a hole in his bedroom while the day I got accepted into college, the man who still, after all this time, thought love and loyalty were things you could bully out of people. "You made yourself small, Danny," I said quietly, and the words tasted bitter even as I said them. "You did that all on your own." He looked up at me then, eyes glossy with unshed tears, and for the first time in a long time, there was no anger there, just something worse, disappointment, sadness so thick it almost choked me. "I needed you," he whispered. "Not your money, not your power trip. I just needed you." And there it was, the raw, ugly truth I hadn't been willing to look at when I set my little plan in motion. He hadn't called because he wanted a handout. He had called because he didn't know how to ask for help like a man, didn't know how to say he was drowning without grabbing onto someone else and pulling them under too. I sat down heavily across from him, staring at the worn rug between us, feeling the sharp, undeniable sting of regret. I had won, sure. I had played the long game and crushed him under the weight of his own mistakes. But looking at him now, broken and bitter and smaller than I ever wanted him to be, I wasn't sure if I had really won anything worth keeping. We sat there in the heavy silence for what felt like hours, two broken kids trapped in the bodies of adults who didn't know how to forgive each other. He eventually passed out on the couch, snoring softly, and I covered him with an old blanket before I went upstairs, my heart heavier than it had been all Christmas. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, I thought about all the times I could have reached out instead of striking back, all the little moments when choosing kindness might have built a bridge instead of digging a trench between us. Maybe he would have spat on the bridge anyway. Maybe he would have burned it down the second it didn't suit him. Or maybe, just maybe, he would have crossed it. I didn't know anymore. I thought winning would feel better. Instead, all it did was make Christmas even colder.